Grayridge was the kind of place where everyone knew each other. It had one high school, one grocery store, a single police station, and a small river that split the town in two. People left their doors unlocked, children rode bicycles through the streets until sunset, and neighbors greeted one another by name. Crime was rare, almost unheard of, which is why the morning of March 14, 2009, changed everything forever. At 7:42 a.m., a panicked 911 call came from Claire Morrison's next-door neighbor, Mrs. Thompson. She had walked over to lend Claire a cooking pot but found the front door slightly open. Thinking Claire might still be asleep, she called out her name. When there was no response, she stepped inside and screamed. Claire, only 31 years old and beloved by the entire community, was lying on the living room floor, blood pooling beneath her. Within minutes, police cars and an ambulance arrived. Officers from the Grayridge Police Department sealed off the street, shocked by the brutality of the scene. Claire wasn't just dead, she had clearly fought back. Furniture was overturned, picture frames smashed, and broken glass glittered across the floor. It looked like a crime of rage, not just a simple burglary. Detective Mark Halpern, the most experienced officer in town, took charge. He walked through the scene slowly, taking in every detail. Claire had likely died around 2 or 3 a.m. The struggle suggested she had known her attacker or at least seen him clearly. Her fingernails were cracked, and stuck under one of them was a small piece of dark blue fabric, evidence of a violent defense. On the kitchen table sat Claire's planner. The last handwritten note caught everyone's attention. Meeting with Lucas, 9 p.m. The name circled in red ink immediately became the focus of the investigation. Lucas Ward was a 27-year-old mechanic who lived a few blocks away. He had been seen arguing with Claire in public 3 days earlier near the grocery store. Witnesses said the conversation was heated, with Claire walking away upset. Rumors spread quickly, relationship issues, money problems, jealousy. But nobody knew the truth. All the town knew was that Lucas and Claire had been close once, perhaps too close. Detective Halpern believed he had a lead. A motive plus evidence was a combination the department rarely got on day one of a case. He ordered officers to bring Lucas in for questioning. At 10:15 a.m., Lucas was found at home, half asleep, unaware of the tragedy that had taken place. When police banged on his door, he opened it in confusion. He looked shocked when they told him Claire was dead. Instead of giving grief or denial, Lucas stopped breathing for a moment, frozen in disbelief. He repeatedly told officers he hadn't seen her since their argument and had been home alone the previous night. But to investigators, that answer only made him look worse. Halpern conducted a search of Lucas's house while officers questioned him at the station. They sifted through closets, drawers, laundry baskets, anywhere evidence might be hidden. Then, in a bedroom closet, they found something damning, a dark blue jacket with a tear in the sleeve. It looked eerily similar to the small piece of fabric found under Claire's nails. To Halpern, this was the final piece he needed. Back at the station, Lucas was told about the jacket. His face went pale. He said the jacket had been torn weeks earlier at work, and he could prove it. But he had no paperwork, no witnesses, and no one who could confirm his alibi from the night of the murder. Alone in the interrogation room, with fluorescent lights glaring down on him, Lucas realized that everything was falling apart. He kept repeating the same words. "I didn't do this. I swear I didn't do this." But the investigators didn't want explanations. They wanted closure. Grayridge was a small town. A brutal murder threatened its sense of security and reputation. The community wanted justice quickly, and the police felt pressure to deliver. With physical evidence that seemed to match and a public argument from days earlier, Lucas became the perfect suspect. The case looked clean, convincing, and easy to present in court. Within 48 hours, detectives formally charged Lucas Ward with the murder of Claire Morrison. The trial that followed was brief, shockingly brief. Only 3 main points were presented against Lucas. Claire had written his name in her planner on the night she died. The torn jacket matched the fiber under her nails. Their public argument gave him motive. Lucas's defense argued that the evidence was circumstantial and that police had jumped to conclusions. But in the eyes of the jury, the case seemed obvious. People in Grayridge had already made up their minds before the verdict was even read. The idea that someone else could be responsible never crossed their minds. After only 2 hours of deliberation, the jury returned with a verdict of guilty. Lucas stood motionless as the courtroom erupted in whispers. Some people nodded in satisfaction, believing justice had been served. Others simply watched in silence, unsettled by the speed of the decision. Lucas was sentenced to 25 years in prison. As the courtroom doors closed and Lucas was led away in handcuffs, Graridge breathed a sigh of relief. The town believed the nightmare was over. Claire's killer was behind bars, and life could return to normal. But the truth was far more complicated. The real story was still hidden, buried beneath assumptions, rushed conclusions, and one small detail that no one bothered to question. The real killer was still out there. Lucas Ward entered prison at age 27. He was angry, confused, and terrified. He had grown up believing the justice system protected the innocent. But now, the system had failed him, and every night he lay awake thinking about the moment the judge said the word guilty. Life in prison was nothing like the world outside. The noise never stopped. Shouting, metal doors slamming, footsteps echoing down concrete hallways. Lucas had to learn how to survive among men who never trusted anyone. Some prisoners believed he was innocent, others didn't care. To them, he was just another convict trying to stay alive. In the beginning, Lucas felt hope. He believed the truth would come out quickly. He fully expected someone to discover the real killer, reopen the case, and set him free. But weeks turned into months, and months turned into years. Appeals were filed, rejected, and forgotten. Lawyers visited, made promises, and then stopped answering letters. Lucas watched his life fade away piece by piece. His closest friends stopped writing. His old job at the local auto shop was filled by someone new. His home was sold to cover unpaid bills. The only constant was his youngest sister, Emily. Emily had always believed Lucas was innocent. On the day of his sentencing, she had stood in the courtroom, gripping the railing so tightly her hands turned white. While the rest of the town accepted the verdict, Emily refused to move on. She became Lucas's voice on the outside. Every month, Emily visited the prison. She brought news from the world, updates about appeals, and thick stacks of papers she believed might help. Sometimes Lucas smiled and tried to stay strong. Other times, he couldn't speak at all. Seeing his younger sister fight for him, while he sat behind bars, made him feel powerless. Years passed. Technology advanced, the world changed, and Graridge forgot about the case. Lucas became just another name in an old dusty file. But Emily never gave up. She spent countless nights in front of her laptop, searching for lawyers who specialized in wrongful convictions. She read articles, watched documentaries, and learned how often innocent people ended up behind bars. What frustrated Emily the most was how many unanswered questions remained. Why had police ignored the fingerprints that weren't Lucas's? Why was the shoe print near the couch never discussed in court? Why had two neighbors reported seeing a man outside Claire's house that night, but their statements disappeared from the final case file? It seemed to her that the police had been in a hurry to close the case. The whole investigation had been rushed, too perfect, too convenient. But Emily needed someone who could help her prove it. That person appeared unexpectedly. One night, after her shift at the local diner, Emily sat down to send another round of emails to journalists. Most reporters never replied. Some responded politely before moving on to the next story. But this time was different. At 1:16 a.m., Emily received a message from Sarah Harlow, a 24-year-old investigative journalist working for a regional news outlet. Sarah had recently started a series on wrongful convictions. She read Emily's email twice and felt something was off. The case seemed too simple, almost scripted. Why had such thin evidence led to a 25-year sentence? Sarah was young, but she was determined and willing to take risks. She agreed to visit Graridge the following week. When Sarah met Emily outside the prison gates, she didn't expect the amount of paperwork Emily had collected. Emily opened a backpack stuffed with old trial transcripts, police reports, letters, and crime scene photos she had obtained through Freedom of Information requests. Sarah spent hours reading them in a hotel room, writing notes, and highlighting details. One thing became immediately clear. No one had bothered to look deeper. The entire case had been built around 3 pieces of evidence. Lucas was scheduled to meet Claire the night she died. They had recently argued in public. A scrap of fabric matched Lucas's jacket. But the pieces that didn't fit were even more important. Fingerprints at the crime scene didn't match Lucas or Claire. The shoe print was a different size than Lucas's. Neighbors had reported a strange man walking quickly away from Claire's house at 2 a.m. None of this had been discussed during the trial. Sarah requested DNA testing on the scrap of fabric taken from Claire's fingernails. In 2009, DNA technology was limited. But now, 15 years later, techniques were far more advanced. If the DNA didn't belong to Lucas, everything would change. Meanwhile, Lucas waited in uncertainty. Days in prison stretched endlessly. He sat in the same gray cafeteria, ate the same bland food, walked the same concrete yard, and returned to the same small cell every night. Prison life had taught him patience, but now that a real chance at freedom existed, waiting felt unbearable. Weeks passed before Sarah received a call from the lab. She stood outside her office, clutching her phone, her heart pounding. The DNA results were in. The scrap of fabric did not belong to Lucas Ward. Instead, it matched a man with a criminal record from another state, someone police had never investigated. Sarah immediately contacted Emily, who burst into tears. For the first time in 15 years, Lucas had real evidence that supported his innocence. Sarah pushed the story forward. Local news outlets picked it up. Social media spread it further. Soon the district attorney had no choice but to reopen the case. A hearing was scheduled to review Lucas's conviction. On the day of the hearing, Lucas was escorted into the courtroom in handcuffs. Emily and Sarah sat in the front row. When the DNA report was presented, the courtroom fell silent. Eventually, the judge made the announcement Lucas had been waiting to hear for 15 years. This court vacates the conviction of Lucas Ward. Lucas sank into his chair, overwhelmed. After so many years of silence, the world finally heard him. But Lucas didn't know that freedom was only the beginning. Someone else had been out there all along, and the story was far from over. Lucas Ward stood just outside the courthouse, blinking against the sunlight. For 15 years he had lived beneath fluorescent bulbs, behind steel bars and locked doors. The world looked strange, too open, too loud, too fast. Cars rushed down the street. People spoke into cell phones, and digital billboards flashed advertisements he had never seen before. It felt like waking up mid-movie in a world that had kept playing without him. But the biggest shock was the noise around him. Reporters crowded the courthouse steps, cameras clicking like machine gun fire. Microphones were pushed toward his face. How does it feel to be free? Do you forgive the justice system? What's your next move? Lucas could barely speak. His mouth felt dry, and his voice trembled when he finally whispered, "I just want to go home." Emily reached for his arm, steadying him. Her eyes were wet, not from sadness, but from the relief of finally seeing her brother outside prison walls. Sarah stood behind them, looking proud but also cautious. She knew this story wasn't finished. It had too many missing pages, too many unanswered questions. Life after bars. Emily drove Lucas home in a car that felt unfamiliar. Cars now had touchscreens, backup cameras, and electronic dashboards. Lucas stared at everything like he was seeing the future. Even the town looked different. Buildings were newly painted, a few shops had changed names, and the high school had doubled in size. Inside Emily's small house, Lucas moved slowly from room to room, touching objects he had not seen in years: a real couch, real carpet, a door he could open himself without asking permission. He sat on the edge of the bed Emily had prepared for him and just breathed. For the first night in 15 years, he slept without bars in front of him. But freedom didn't feel simple. In the days that followed, Lucas tried to rebuild a routine. Emily took him shopping for clothes, a phone, and other basic things he needed to start over. But everywhere they went, people stared. Some approached him with sympathy. "I'm so sorry for what you went through." Others could barely meet his eyes. A few still avoided him completely. In small towns, memories lasted longer than facts. Then came the harder part: therapy sessions, paperwork, government meetings, legal documents, and compensation filings. The state of Greyridge offered him money for his lost years, but money couldn't return what had been taken. His parents never got to see him free. His career was gone forever, and the world he returned to was not the world he left. Some nights Lucas lay awake in his new room, hearing the sound of prison doors slamming in his memory. Freedom had a price, one he was still learning to pay. Emily and Sarah kept digging. While Lucas struggled to adjust, Emily and Sarah stayed focused on the bigger issue. If Lucas wasn't the killer, then someone else had murdered Claire Morrison, and had never been caught. Sarah requested the full case file from the district attorney's office. It was thick, hundreds of pages, photos, witness reports, and interview transcripts. She spread the papers across a large table and read everything again. Emily joined her, highlighting every detail that seemed strange or incomplete. Several things continued to bother them. The DNA from the scrap of fabric belonged to a man named Anthony Beck, a criminal from another state. Burke had been arrested multiple times before Claire's murder, yet he had never been investigated in 2009. Even stranger, Anthony Burke had died 10 years earlier, long before the new evidence surfaced. How could a dead man's DNA lead both investigations? Sarah made another chilling discovery. Several pieces of evidence, shoeprint photographs, additional witness interviews, and early forensic notes were missing from the official court file. It was as if someone had selectively removed anything that might point away from Lucas. The more Sarah dug, the more she felt something deeper was wrong. A crime echoes again. Then, just as Lucas began to settle into life outside prison, Graridge was shaken once more. One morning, Emily burst into Lucas's room with a phone in her hand. "There's been another murder." Lucas sat up instantly. His chest tightened. This time, the victim was a 29-year-old woman named Rachel West. She lived alone in a small apartment near the river. When police arrived at her home, they found a crime scene that mirrored Claire's. Signs of a violent struggle, furniture knocked over, broken items scattered across the floor, and a torn piece of dark blue fabric under her fingernails. Sarah listened to the news broadcast that afternoon, her blood turning cold. It was the exact same pattern as Claire's murder, every detail, every clue. It couldn't be coincidence. Within hours, rumors spread across town. Some whispered that Lucas must have done it after all. Others believed a copycat was trying to mimic the old crime. But Sarah suspected something more disturbing. She contacted a source inside the police department and begged for information. When the new lab results arrived, Sarah received a text message. "DNA matches Anthony Burke. The same dead man." Sarah stared at her phone, speechless. This changed everything. She called Emily and Lucas immediately, urging them to meet. Lucas listened silently as Sarah laid out the new facts. He shook his head slowly. "How is that possible? He's been dead for years." Sarah didn't have an answer, but she had a theory. Perhaps someone had access to Burke's evidence from past cases. Perhaps the DNA had been taken and planted to frame innocent men. If that was true, Lucas wasn't just the victim of one mistake. He was the victim of a pattern. A new investigation begins. Sarah and Emily began tracking down anyone who worked the original investigation. Many officers were retired, but one name kept appearing in the reports. Detective Mark Halpern, the man who had led the case against Lucas. Halpern had retired 5 years earlier and moved to a small cabin outside town. Sarah arranged an interview with him. When they arrived, Halpern answered the door looking older, tired, and nervous. His hand shook slightly as he poured coffee. When Sarah mentioned Anthony Burke's DNA, Halpern's expression froze. He looked away and said one sentence that gave both women chills. "There are things about that case I was never allowed to talk about." Emily leaned forward. Aloud. "By who?" Halpern slowly turned toward the window. "My partner," he said. "Detective Ryan Hale. The same detective currently leading the new investigation." And just like that, the truth began to surface. Detective Ryan Hale stood in front of the cameras outside the Graridge police station, delivering a calm and professional statement about Rachel West's murder. His voice was steady, but the public could feel the tension beneath it. The murder had shaken the town, not just because of its brutality, but because of its frightening similarity to the one that happened 15 years earlier. Inside the station, however, panic was spreading among officers. Whispers filled the hallways. Some veteran officers remembered the Morrison case vividly. They had watched Lucas Ward go to prison for a murder many of them thought was open and shut. Now, new questions rattled their confidence. If Lucas didn't kill Claire, then who did? And worse, had the police locked up an innocent man while the real killer continued walking free? The DNA report on Rachel West had returned quickly. The results were shocking, yet familiar. The sample matched Anthony Burke, the same man linked genetically to the 15-year-old crime. The same man who had died 10 years earlier. Inside a small coffee shop across town, Sarah Harlow and Emily Ward sat in stunned silence after hearing the news. Lucas sat beside Emily, staring blankly at the table. He had barely tasted freedom, and already suspicion was beginning to cloud the air around him again. Sarah pulled out her notebook. "This isn't an accident," she said quietly. "Someone is planting Burke's DNA. They did it 15 years ago, and they just did it again." Lucas looked up sharply. "But how? Who has access to it?" Emily swallowed hard. She already knew the answer, even before Sarah spoke. Someone inside the system. A visit to the past. Sarah returned to the rural cabin of former Detective Mark Halpern. The retired officer opened the door slowly, looking as though he had aged 10 more years in the short time since she last saw him. He invited her and Emily inside, shutting the curtains before sitting down heavily. Halpern rubbed his forehead, guilt carved deep into every wrinkle on his face. "I knew this day would come," he said softly. "I tried to forget. God knows I tried." He explained that the Morrison case had not unfolded the way the public believed. In 2009, Graridge had faced political pressure. Violent crime rates were rising statewide, and the police chief wanted fast results to restore public trust. When Claire Morrison was found murdered, Detective Ryan Hale, then a young investigator eager to prove himself, was assigned to the case alongside Halpern. Almost immediately, Hale pushed the theory that Lucas Ward was guilty. He believed the town needed a quick suspect, and Lucas fit the narrative: recent argument, emotional motive, physical evidence. But Halpern swore that Lucas was never the only suspect. "We had other leads," Halpern murmured. "Other DNA. Witnesses who saw a different man outside Claire's house." Emily leaned forward, her voice tight. "So what happened to all that evidence?" Halpern's eyes darkened. "Ryan said he had it under control. He said the chief wanted the case closed fast. I trusted him." Halpern paused, shaking slightly. A week later, the other evidence disappeared, and new evidence that pointed at Lucas, appeared. Sarah stared at him. "You're telling us evidence was planted?" Halpern didn't answer directly, but his silence was enough. He looked broken. "I thought maybe I was imagining things. That maybe I was wrong. And when Lucas was convicted, I convinced myself the court must have known more than I did." Emily's hands clenched into fists. "So you let my brother spend 15 years in prison because you didn't want to believe the truth?" Halpern looked away, unable to meet her eyes. "I failed him," he whispered. "And now another woman is dead." Connecting the pieces. When Sarah and Emily left Halpern's cabin, they drove straight to the county records office. With Halpern's confession in mind, Sarah dug through old logs, storage files, and property records. She found what she needed in a dusty storage binder. Evidence transfer logs from 2009. Listed among the signatures was a handwritten note. "Evidence transferred. Burke DNA sample. Signed, R. Hale." Sarah stared at the page. Proof. Detective Hale had personally checked Burke's sample out of the evidence room, just days before Claire's murder. It wasn't coincidence. Ryan Hale had the means, the access, and the opportunity to plant DNA that framed Lucas. But Sarah wanted to know why. Why would a detective risk everything to manipulate evidence? Why destroy an innocent man's life? Pressure from above. Sarah requested public records for internal police reviews from 2009. What she discovered next painted a bleak picture of the justice system at the time. Graridge had been under financial and political pressure. Multiple unsolved cases had damaged the police department's reputation. The mayor wanted quick results. Funding was in jeopardy. Promotions were stalled. Solving a brutal murder in record time would boost public confidence, secure department funding, push young Detective Ryan Hale into the spotlight. And that's exactly what happened. After Lucas's conviction, Hale rose quickly through the ranks. His name appeared in articles celebrating flawless detective work and perfect clearance rates. Within a decade, he became the face of the department. Emily felt sick. All this time, he built his entire career on a lie. But the darkest realization was still ahead. Detective Hale's pattern. Sarah reviewed Hale's past cases. She analyzed 15 years of investigative files and noticed something chilling. Hale had solved more major cases than any detective in the region. Many of those convictions were based on forensic evidence that appeared late in the investigation. Several defendants had claimed innocence. Some cases had missing or incomplete evidence logs, just like Lucas's. It wasn't just one mistake. It was a method, a pattern, a system. Hale wasn't just ambitious, he was dangerous. A man willing to sacrifice the innocent to protect his reputation. But Sarah still had one unresolved question. What about Rachel West? Halpern had suggested that Hale might have copied evidence in the past, but Rachel's murder wasn't staged. It wasn't recreated from old files. It was real. Which led to the biggest question of all. Had Hale escalated from planting evidence to becoming a killer himself? The walls close in. Sarah, Emily, and Lucas worked through the night, preparing a report to hand over to the State Attorney General. But they were running out of time. Hale was still in charge of the new investigation. He controlled evidence, crime scenes, and reports. If he sensed they were closing in, he could destroy everything. Or worse, he could silence them permanently. Sarah looked at Lucas. He took 15 years from you, she whispered, and he has everything to lose if the truth comes out. For the first time since his release, Lucas felt real fear. If Hale had killed once, what would he do now that the past was catching up? The truth was about to explode, and someone was going to get hurt. The courtroom was silent as Vincent Hale sat at the defendant's table once again. After 15 years in prison and a brief taste of freedom, he was right back where everything had started. His face showed calmness, but inside his heart was pounding. Everyone believed the real killer had returned, and all eyes were once again on him. The prosecution was already preparing to push hard, determined not to lose the case a second time. But this time, Vincent wasn't fighting alone. On the other side of the room sat Maya Reeves with her laptop open, a stack of files, and a fire in her eyes. She was ready for the fight of her life. The case against Vincent seemed strong. The new victim, Laura Banks, had been killed in the same way as the original victim 15 years ago. Same method, same location, same signature. Even the time of death aligned with the hour Vincent was walking home alone. The police claimed there were signs that someone matching Vincent's size had been seen leaving the alley. The prosecutors argued that the original evidence had been right all along, and that Vincent had fooled everyone with a well-staged innocence claim. But Maya wasn't convinced for a second. She knew something still didn't add up. It was too perfect, too clean. Real criminals rarely repeated methods after so many years unless they wanted to send a message. This felt intentional. Someone wanted the world to believe Vincent was guilty again. As the trial continued, Maya dug deeper into the files she had worked tirelessly on for weeks. She had spent nights reading every police statement, cross-checking old crime scene photos, interviewing former officers, and searching through digital records. There was something that had always bothered her. Both murders happened on the same date, exactly 15 years apart. That was no coincidence. Most killers don't wait 15 years to commit the exact same crime. Not unless they were trying to erase something, or someone. With the judge's permission, Maya called her first unexpected witness, Detective Raymond Cross, the original lead investigator in the old case. The man's hair had turned gray, his posture slightly bent, but his voice still carried weight. Maya questioned him about something seemingly small, a report from a neighbor who had seen a mysterious van near the original crime scene. The report was never added to the official case file. When she asked why, the detective hesitated. His mouth tightened, and the courtroom leaned forward, waiting. There was pressure, he finally admitted. Pressure to close the case quickly. Murmurs spread through the courtroom. The judge called the room to order, but the damage was already done. It suggested that someone had wanted the investigation pushed in a specific direction, from the very beginning. Maya wasn't done. She pulled out another report. A second witness 15 years ago had described a suspicious community volunteer seen near the crime scene, someone who ran a youth program and was trusted by many. That detail was also missing from police records. The judge's eyebrows rose. The prosecutor objected, but the judge allowed the questioning to continue. Then Maya introduced something new. Security footage from a nearby building recorded 3 days before the new murder. It showed a tall man wearing gloves and carrying plastic bags walking into the alley. The footage wasn't clear enough to show his face, but it was clearly not Vincent. He was too tall, too broad. This was someone else. Someone who had been planning ahead. The courtroom was buzzing. The judge stared at Maya over the top of his glasses, impressed despite himself. Then came the moment that changed everything. Maya played another video, an interview she had secretly recorded from a woman in a retirement home. The woman was frail, but her voice was sharp. She had been the assistant of a man named Leonard Pierce, the founder of the local community outreach organization. He had been revered in town, called a hero, trusted by families, schools, and the police. But behind closed doors, she claimed he had a dark obsession with punishing young men who wasted their futures. He believed some people deserved to vanish so others could learn from their mistakes. And she remembered something else. Pierce had driven a dark van, the same one seen 15 years earlier. The prosecutor immediately objected, shouting that there was no proof. But Maya was prepared. She had recently discovered that Leonard Pierce had died 2 years after Vincent was sent to prison. Maya argued that if he had been the real killer, then someone else must be continuing his work. Someone who admired him. Someone he had trained. Maya presented more evidence. Files showing that Pierce had mentored a troubled youth who looked exactly like the figure seen in the recent footage. That youth was now an adult, and he had gone missing just 2 months before the new murder. No job records, no residency, no bank activity. Maya believed he was hiding, preparing for something. The police had never looked for him because no one had known he mattered. Finally, Maya stood in front of the judge and jury and spoke with a controlled fire. Vincent Hale didn't commit the first murder. He didn't commit the second. Someone else has been following the dark philosophy of a man the police never investigated deeply enough. And Vincent has already paid 15 years of his life for the real killer's sins. How many more years should he lose while the truth hides in shadows? Silence filled the room. The jury exchanged uncertain glances. The prosecutor had no immediate response. The judge called a recess. Hours later, Vincent sat alone in a quiet hallway outside the courtroom. He ran his hands through his hair and breathed for what felt like the first time in days. When Maya joined him, she didn't speak. She simply sat beside him. And in that silence, something shifted. The verdict came the next morning. All charges were dismissed. Vincent Hale was officially cleared. As he walked outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed around him. But Vincent wasn't thinking about cameras, questions, or headlines. He was thinking about the second killer, still somewhere out there, carrying the shadows of a dead mentor. The story wasn't over. But for the first time in 15 years, Vincent was free on his own terms. The truth had finally spoken.